Hi, I'm Khalil Cumberbatch, Associate Vice President of Policy at the David Rothenberg Center for Public Policy, and welcome to Both Sides of the Bars, a discussion-driven show that examines the criminal justice system from various perspectives, including from those most impacted by the criminal justice system. We discuss critical questions about how the current system works, its intersections with social justice, and highlight the efforts that are being made to improve the lives of everyone that is affected by it. We ask you, the viewer, to spread the word about both sides of the bars and to share your comments with us on Twitter at The Fortune Society. My guests today are Topeka Sam, founder and executive director of the Ladies of Hope Ministries, and Naquasia Pollard, associate assistant for the Ladies of Hope Ministries. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Khalil. Thank you for having us.
As the conversation unfolds, please let us know your thoughts by tweeting at us at Ka Cumberbatch and at the LOHM. Today's show is entitled Taken, the Hyper-incarceration of Women. Overwhelmingly, the discussion regarding the impact of the criminal justice system has largely focused on men in general and men of color specifically. However, it is critical for society and advocates to highlight more keenly the impact that mass incarceration has on women. According to the Sentencing Project, women have been continuously rising subset of the U.S. prison population. Since 1980, women incarcerated in state and federal prisons have been rising at an alarming rate of 50% higher than men. More specifically, African American women represent the highest population of incarcerated women. In 2015, the imprisonment rate for African American women was 103 per 100,000. which is more than twice the rate of imprisoned white women, which is 52 per 100,000. So thank you again for being here today as we talk about this critical issue. So Topeka, I understand this is an issue that you're very passionate about as an individual and as an advocate. Can you share with us and the audience what motivates you to be so engaged in this work?
Thank you, Khalil, again for having us. We really, really appreciate being here and having the opportunity to always utilize media and different avenues to raise and lift the voices of women. And so what brings me to the work is my incarceration and the things that I witnessed and experienced during my incarceration. I felt a sense of urgency that in coming out, I had to help provide platforms and access to resources for women and girls coming home and their children. And so for my release in May of 2015, I have been crisscrossing this country, doing work, engaging and mobilizing other women, empowering and inspiring them to continue to build organizations that are focused on women for obvious reasons. You know, my experience, I can speak firsthand on mine. And so I feel that our sisters can do the same thing. And so as you stated for the audience, it is a large number of women, specifically women of color. And I saw every day a different woman coming in, and sometimes women coming in and going back and coming in and going back because of, substance misuse, overdosing, but being criminalized for it. And what we've also realized is that women go through the criminal legal system mainly because of some type of trauma or violence that was inflicted upon them, whether it's from abuse, physical, mental, emotional, or the state abuse when you think about economic injustice, lack of resources that are given to certain communities, again, specifically communities of color. And so that's what I do. Yeah.
And so the women that you were incarcerated with, can you say a little bit more about what were some of the challenges that they faced while incarcerated, but also some of the challenges that they faced after incarceration?
So I heard you quote 60% of women are mothers in prison. And the numbers are always rising. I think I also heard someone say something about 80% at one time. And so specifically the lack of family unity and not being able to have their children, and where do the children go? And if they have parents, the woman who's incarcerated, then they go to a parent who is probably elderly on a fixed income. having women who have these draconian sentences based on the drug war and sentencing that range from 20 years to life, you know, that the children grow up without their parents. And so then it perpetuates this cycle, sometimes of the children being impacted by foster care, which is also a prison in itself, right? And then the children end up going within that system. And then just them thinking about, okay, when I come home, then what do I do? How am I going to get my children back? Where am I going to live? Can I get into a safe place to live? And then if not, then how am I going to provide for myself in order to get my kids back? Because you have these barriers of probation and parole. Foster care puts barriers to say that you have to have a certain type of housing in order to have your children. The elderly parents may have passed on, or because of their fixed income, they expect when you come home to now help in that household. You know, so it's these things that women have to deal with that are very different than what men deal with on a regular basis.
And so you were incarcerated in the federal system.
Yes.
And so while there is some overlap, there is also some distinction to be made. And so, Naquasia, do you want to share about what were some of your interpretation of the barriers that women face while incarcerated, but also after incarceration, and also to make the distinction between this federal system and the state and the state system?
Well, I was incarcerated for 15 years. I did majority of my time in Bedford Hills Correctional Facility, which is a max facility for women. And on the other side of Topeka, you know, drug wars as far as women getting this excessive sentencing, it was excessive sentencing that I seen as far as violent crimes in the state perspective. Majority of the women were mothers that were incarcerated, left their child at 2 and 3 years old, 7 to 8. As for me, with my experience, when I became incarcerated, I was pregnant.
And how many months pregnant were you?
I was 8 weeks.
Wow.
When I found out that I was pregnant. And the journey is rough. And, you know, the state doesn't cater to, well, the state somewhat caters to mothers being incarcerated. Like I went on trailers and I did, Bedford Hills has a wonderful program, Our Children, where your child can come up once a month to see you for preteen and teen program, and you know the mothers have to do a workshop in order for their child to be there, and I participated in that, and that's how me and my daughter was able to form a bond. However, when you come home from being incarcerated, from formerly being incarcerated, it's difficult. You know, your child only knows you as mommy being incarcerated with the guards, etc. Now, I'm waking her up for school and I'm helping her with homework, so it's a different perspective on how she sees me and how I see her. And incarceration separates the family because when you come home, the child doesn't know you and you don't know your child, even though you may have been fortunate to have the visits. What about if it's a mother was formerly incarcerated and coming home to their child, and the child don't know them at all? You know, where's the reconnection of family? And it lacks. You know, the judge doesn't care about your child or you. They just want you to pay your debt to society and move on. When I got incarcerated, I was 19 years old. I had a high school diploma. I just made poor choices in friends. And I was just a person of happenstance. You know, things happen, and I was somewhat, as someone would say, I was a product of my environment, wanting to be with the in crowd. So once I got incarcerated, my first agenda was to go to school, which was to obtain a college degree, because that's all that I seen that was feasible for me for my transition home, because eventually I was going to go home. And I think that education is the key for a woman to be prepared for her upon her release, which the state doesn't. You know, Marymount Manhattan College was the college that I graduated from, and the funding, it was hard to get funding. You know, the professors is volunteering their time to come into this facility and they being harassed by the guards, you know, so it's a different dynamic. And, you know, and they all, a woman wants to do in her right state of mind is to elevate and to be a better person and to overshadow that negative perception that society may have.
And so in your experience, what factors do you believe contribute to the dramatic rise of the number of women incarcerated? And so that's for Topeka or for you, Naquasia.
Okay. Well, I've noticed that 85% of a population of women, the correctional facilities that I were in, that was Bedford Hills and Taconic Correctional Facility, and 80% of the women were molested, sexually abused. And that's their story. You know, some get high so they won't feel the pain of what happened to them when they were 8 years old and what Uncle Billy did to them when they were sitting on their lap. And nobody pays attention to that. Nobody, when you go in front of the judge, when you commit your crime, nobody cares, you know, and that's when once a woman is sexually abused or physically abused, they tend to get in situations where they seeking something that they're lacking and or what they're used to. You know, a lot of women go to prostitution, and it was one lady, she did 27 years, and she killed her John. Because
and
she was,
John is?
that she was a prostitute, and the man, he was 75 years old, and all he wanted was comfort because he had lost his wife. So he picked her up, and she snapped. And she killed him. She stabbed him to death. And it was that anger wasn't for him. And, you know, it's misplaced anger. And there's no resources that a woman have to get help, or they don't think that they need help. And, you know, it's just the lack of knowledge that society has that they don't want to help. You know, they just care about, oh, you did what you did and you're going to pay for it. When that's not the case. There's always an underlying meaning to what motivated you to do what you do.
Topeka, in your experience?
Yeah, I would agree with Naquasia as it relates to violence or sexual trauma and abuse. And again, talking about communities of color specifically, because I know within our communities, when things happen, it's always like, you know, you pray and you don't talk about it. And God will take care of it. You know, and it wasn't actually until I was incarcerated that I knew that I was a victim of sexual violence, because I was raped by a boyfriend. So I didn't realize throughout my life that actually perpetuated a level of promiscuity and different things that happened in my life until I actually went through a trauma and abuse class inside. And I wasn't told to go get therapy or counseling or anything like that, because I didn't know that I had access, even though I was a professional person. I had been to college. I had great medical insurance through my job. And so I could have afforded that benefit, but I didn't even know that I had qualified for it, right? Because I didn't know that I went through that. And so it's this thing that women definitely go through. And then to add on what Naquasia was talking about, and I remember you saying difference between state and federal prison. So in the federal system, we didn't have access to college. If you wanted to go to college, then you had to pay for correspondence courses because the Pell Grants were taken away and they didn't provide those type of funding. The things that they offered women in federal prison for continuing adult education classes, adult continuing education classes, was knitting, crocheting, plastic canvassing, beading, and it was very different than what they provided for men in federal prison. And so that also kind of created this narrative of what what the system thinks about women, right? And when women get involved in the criminal legal system, how you fix them, right? It's basically tell you to go sit in it. And so, you know, if you're coming out, because I tried to create programs and they kept knocking it down. And when you come out, if there are no programs or access to resources, how is knitting and crocheting going to be a marketable skill for me? And what will I do when I come out after 20 years and don't know that there's Metro cards now and I was using tokens before I went in? You know, how am I going to navigate without embarrassment and without going back into that same mentality of what I need to do in order to make it? So the systems are different, and you know, they have reinitiated the Pell Grant. I know it's in pilot programs. I haven't heard any women having access in the federal system as to date yet. But you know, hopefully it will allow that. But we look at decarceration. So you know, we don't want to bring these additional programs in. We're trying to bring our sisters out.
And so on that note, it's important to recognize that women who are incarcerated may also be mothers. And the Sentencing Project states approximately 60% of women in state prisons have children under the age of 18 years old. Women who are pregnant, as well as in delivery during incarceration, are routinely shackled and handcuffed. 18 states have regulation and/or prohibit shackling of pregnant women, and 24 states have laws that regulate and/or prohibit shackling women in the correctional facilities. However, advocates have identified multiple women who were nonetheless shackled. So, Naquasia, you mentioned about your experience about being a mother while incarcerated. Is this something that you experienced while you were incarcerated?
Yes, I did. When the law was passed for New York State, I was on Rikers Island, and
which law is that?
Was that a woman cannot be shackled while she's pregnant and after she gives birth. It was 6 months into my sentence on Rikers Island. I was 6 months pregnant, and because I was going back and forth to court every month, sometimes twice, 3 times a month, and because I was fighting my case. And I was being shackled with the black box, a padlock, shackled on my feet. Mind you, I'm 6 months pregnant, almost 6 months pregnant. My feet, ankles were swollen. My job. One time, the shackles got stuck on my foot, and they had to cut the shackles off. And it's something that's traumatizing. It's dehumanizing, and you know I remember one time I'm pregnant. You know, you want to eat, so I'm on the bus and I'm eating like this.
Because your hands are shackled.
Because my hands are shackled, I couldn't. And I want to eat, like I'm hungry. My baby's like, where's the food? So I'm like, you know, and I'm trying to eat, and I just started to cry, you know, because I was really unable to. And the girl that was sitting next to me, she wasn't shackled because she didn't have a high profile case. She had to feed me. So it's something that the political aspect of incarceration with the men or the policymakers have to really look into. You know, there's no sympathy, there's no humanization for a woman that's carrying a child. There's no limits. You are labeled as a criminal, and that's it. It's straight cut and forward.
So, Topeka, I want to ask, like, although New York State clearly has a law that says women can't be shackled while pregnant and in labor, why is it that women like Naquasia can still be shackled, although there's this law on the books that says it can't happen?
No, because it's not enforced. You know, when you think about Rikers Island and you think about the things that are perpetuated on Rikers Island, right? And you think about the mentality and the culture of what's happening, that goes on to the officers. And the officers are really the ones that are doing the transport.
Right.
And so if they're not enforcing the law, or if they have a bad day and there's no accountability, then they're going to do what they want to do. And actually, in my work at the National Council and thinking about the work that was led by Andrea James, who's the executive director on the Dignity for Incarcerated Women's Act that Senator Booker and Senator Warren had sponsored, it was talking about just that dignity, you know, taking away the shackling of women in prison during child labor, to think about just basic needs that women need in prison, because for some reason the public thinks that because people are, the people or taxpayers are paying to house people there, or warehouse people there, that all the needs are met. But that's not true, you know? In one of my experiences, because I had uterine fibroids and I had to go through the doctor, and when you have fibroids, you have heavy cycles. And so they only gave us a certain amount of sanitary napkins a week. And if you went through more, you had to buy them. And so I had to continue to buy, and thank God I had support from home, because you make $5 to $10, you know, a month in prison, that I had to go to the doctor to try to get them to give me a certain type of pad, and they made me quantify it. They were like, and quantifying means measuring exactly what the cycle was, and it was degrading. Like, you want me to take a bag full of soiled napkins, and I'm being very graphic, you know, so that your viewers understand what this is like, and bring it to a male officer for them to look in the bag and tell me, okay, I'll give you 5 more pads. Like, that's not okay, you know. And so thinking about that and the different things that we were able to share through the network, that they wrote this bill up and put it out. And also what's great about that bill that's really not talked about a lot is the fact that they're advocating to pass that people or women who have been incarcerated can go back in, right? Because when you think about reentry or transitioning, that it starts from within the prison. And how can I, the person who was most impacted, help another person and show them what to do if I can't touch you while you're there? And so trying to change that laws, and then through the National Council, Harriet Davis and Ellen Berry from California, who are with, I believe the organization is Legal Prisoners with Children, and All of Us or None. They did a national training of formerly incarcerated women around the country, and they're going to change in each state individually that still has shackling of women to get that removed from the state legislature, and then make that a national work. So, you know, women are working around this country, really, really pushing forward in, you know, bringing human rights back and bringing our sisters out.
And so you mentioned the National Council. So I just want you to talk briefly to the viewers about your work at the Ladies of Hope Ministries and Hope House specifically. So
the Ladies of Hope Ministries was, you know, the dream realized from when I was incarcerated. When I had started, I talked about the need for resources and housing for women who were coming home, but I wanted to provide a specific need through education, spiritual empowerment, entrepreneurship, and advocacy. I believe in creating leadership first while giving resources, opposed to doing it the other way around, right? Because when we're coming out, that's when we're most raw and we want to help. And so having the support that I had coming home, which was safe housing for me, with my parents, I was then able to say that, okay, I could do all of these fellowships and just focus on the work that I believed I was called to do. And so when I was inside, Vinay Sykes, who is my co-founder on Hope House, we both wanted to do housing. We were both coming back to New York, and so we did. And so we had opened up Hope House, which is a replica of Susan Burton's New Way of Life, where she has 5 houses in California for over the last 20 years, where it's a safe housing space for women and girls. We have the first one, which is in the Bronx. It's a beautiful space, and we feel that, you know, when you bring love and, you know, good community and safe housing to women, that's the same thing that you're able to project out in the community and within yourself. We had a visitor who stated that she lives in a shelter, and so the shame that her just walking out her door from a shelter, because she thinks everybody in the neighborhood knows that she's in a shelter, right? And how does that lead off in your day? But if I know that I'm leaving out of something that's like my home and looks like my home and makes me feel good, and then I'm going to lead out with that. So we're really excited, and we're going through things with parole and state parole, and that's a whole nother segment.
And so Naquasia, what's your role at Hope House?
Well, I'm Topeka Sam's executive assistant. And in the near future, I'll be facilitating some of the groups for the women at the house, self-esteem issues, spirituality, how to become whole again, how to take the process to heal. Not that I say that I have all the answers, you know, and that this, but however, together, collectively, this house is going to provide all the answers for these women that come through there.
Yeah. And so what can the viewers do to support the work that you're doing at Hope House, at the National Council, and then ultimately with the Dignity for Incarcerated Women Act?
Sure. So through the National Council or the Dignity for Incarcerated Women's Act, Cut 50, they're providing a huge campaign to support that work. They can go on cut50.org, I believe it is. Through
and so it's cut, C-U-T, the
50.
number 50.
Yeah.
Okay, got it.
Cut50.org, or just Google it and follow them on social media too, hashtag Cut50. And that's CUT50. Through the Ladies of Hope Ministries at the LOHM on all social media. And Hope House is hopehouse.nyc, where we're still looking for support through the community, looking for community partners to partner resources and references for women who want to come through the program, because we're always going to be at capacity, and we'll be looking to expand in the other boroughs soon. And so we're just looking for help and resources and continued access.
And so if someone wants to donate, where can they go to?
hopehouse.nyc/donate.
One more time.
Hope House, HOPEHOUSE.NYC/donate.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Topeka. Thank you, Naquasia, for joining us today.
Thank you for having
I want to thank you for being so open and vulnerable about sharing your story. I know coming home from prison is not easy, and you're less than a month out. So again, thank you.
Thank you.
So again, my name is Khalil Cumberbatch, and I'm the host for Both Sides of the Bars. Thank you for joining us today as we discuss this very critical issue, and as we continue to analyze both sides of the bars.